here's what we found early on. We found that people were treating this like software. They were treating it as if it's something you have to learn, which is, by the way, the history of technology. You have to learn how Excel works and PowerPoint works. You have to learn how to speak a language. You have to learn calculus. Like your brain, you can't just like skip to the end and say, okay, now I've got it. But what we found was that AI had nothing to do with that because there's nothing to learn. People keep thinking you have to learn how to prompt. And our argument is prompting is literally talking. This is literally like texting a person that knows everything. Nothing more, nothing less. So why is it hard? That's the big question. And the reason it's hard, in a nutshell, is that the brain, the human brain, has a very hard time looking at software and understanding that this is software that behaves like a person because we've never seen it before. So we've built out a lot of frameworks around that, and I think they work.
Welcome to Franklin Covey's On Leadership. I'm your host, Jennifer Colosimo. On Leadership provides insight to our listeners through discussions with senior leaders, thought leaders, practitioners with earned experience, all focused on the human side of strategy and transformation. Our guest today has built a career on the most difficult kind of transformation there is, the kind that requires equal parts courage and consideration. From the mountains of Nepal, where he founded a nonprofit to rescue trafficked children, to the halls of NYU Stern as Dean of Students, and eventually becoming the Chief AI Architect, Conor Grennan has consistently seen and experienced how humans adapt when the world changes beneath their feet. Now serving as the founder and CEO of AI Mindset, he's a trusted voice in the world of helping leaders navigate into the age of artificial intelligence. Conor, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you for having me, Jen. It's great to be here.
We, of course, want to talk with you about your work as the CEO of AI Mindset, and particularly your focus on behavioral leadership components of AI fluency, ranging with organizations as diverse as NASA, Microsoft, and you and I were talking previously about DaVita Healthcare, where I had the great opportunity to work at one point in my career. So we'll get there. That's the main point of our interview. I would like to start, though, with the multiple reinventions that you've had. When you first left university to today, it's like you've lived 10 lifetimes. So could you just give us a broad overview and ensure that we hear also about, recognition from the Dalai Lama is a big one. So I'll let you kick us off.
I feel like you set me up for that. If I can ever shoehorn in the fact that I got personally an award from the Dalai Lama, I love to try to slip that into even the most random conversations because it makes me sound absolutely amazing, which is not entirely deserved, alas. But yeah, it's been a lot of lives, I guess. That's a great way to say it. So just super quickly, I finished University of Virginia, and then I immediately moved abroad, and I worked in security and governance, essentially sort of peace and reconciliation with the Balkans. So I lived in Europe for about 8 years or so between Czech Republic and Brussels. And then I spent 3 years in Nepal, creating an organization that rescued trafficked children and reunited them with their families. And I met my wife actually out there. She's American. But came home because wanted to marry her, even though the organization was obviously still going. That's the work that got me that ridiculous recognition, the award from the Dalai Lama, which is hilarious. I have a photo of it just to prove it. But and then I went to business school. I went to business school at NYU Stern School of Business. Began to study finance, but then got sidetracked because I've been a writer my whole life and ended up writing a book that did well. So I was able to to be a writer for a long time, but I just really missed the business school environment and everything that sort of propelled in the way of thinking and everything. And I just love that kind of like way of thinking with business school students. So I went back and became Dean of Students for the MBA program for Stern. And then while I was at Stern, ChatGPT came out, and I sort of immediately recognized, as probably many people did, that this was going to change everything. But being in an executive role at a business school, I had a little bit of a higher bar, which is this is going to change all of work, and I'm sort of responsible for that partially in this business school. So it forced me to really think, well, how is it going to change work? How is it going to change everything? Considering AI, first of all, requires no tech, and second of all, applies to everyone in every single role in every industry and every organization. How do you deal with a technology like that? So that started me off, working with a lot of organizations, and that just got so big, and the organizations just got so big that I finally, a few months ago, sort of had to leave NYU to kind of pursue that full time. So we have an organization that works with big companies now.
So, when you think about that story, what is the through line for you personally? I mean, sometimes you only see it in hindsight.
Mhm.
From my perspective, you do things and you see the through line. How do you draw a through line for you personally from your international work to today?
Yeah, I sort of hesitate because it's going to sound sort of like very self-serving and everything, and so I don't want to embarrass myself here. But I'd say two things. So first of all, is just storytelling. Like I've been a writer since I was young, and I love figuring out ways of describing things and taking people through things through storytelling, which I know sounds very generic, but listen, you're running this podcast and you know all about this more than anybody, right? Where in your role, so I don't think I have to sell you on that idea, but it's true that storytelling is very powerful. I think that's the most obvious thing to say in the world. But with AI, it's very, very powerful, and that's how I kind of like landed there. But I would say that, first of all, whether it's, doing kind of peace and reconciliation in the Balkans, or how do you describe a challenge on the other side of the world with these trafficked children in such a way that people will care, so that they will donate to a cause that you care very deeply about. And that came through storytelling. That turned out to be a New York Times bestselling book, which was kind of cool, that I was able to write. But and then same with working in business school, what you see is there's, what I kept seeing in business school is that you have the smartest people in the world, but unless they're able to tell their story well, it doesn't resonate with other people. And then I think the other thing, and I'm trying to find a non-corny way of saying this, but I really do like to help people, and I know that sounds, weird and cheesy, but like, but even now, if you know SHRM, the big HR organization, I'm on the board of the foundation there, because and one of the reasons I took the dean of students job is that, like, I'm just really passionate about helping people who are out of work. That's a terrifying place for people to be, and that's partially what got me into AI as well. Is that early on I sort of saw this is going to change everything. I think we're going to have to adapt to this. I just think it's terrifying to the thought of people being out of work. So that's why I kind of like focus my work here. Yes, we trained some of the biggest companies in the world at scale with AI mindset, and we've done some cool things, but ultimately it's about can people sort of bring their skills to the table and be able to provide for their families.
Well, the emphasis on such a human skill, storytelling, the emphasis on, and of course there's both sides. There is something that you're passionate about, you're doing it for work, and you're looking to do good. So I do want to dive into AI, but I have to ask just a little bit about the Dalai Lama before we do it. The Art of Happiness is one of the most meaningful
I
books
agree.
to me, especially based on uh, the questions that were asked, not just being his representation of his faith, but all across. Tell me anything about your experience with the Dalai Lama and how that was.
Okay, I'm going to, because you asked. I wasn't going to force feed this, but it's one of my
I
favorite
know, I
things.
know. You did not prompt me to do
Thank you
this.
for
I'm
saying that.
really
Hear
interested.
that, audience? I did not set up this question. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it was just, kind of dumb luck. Some people saw what I was doing in Nepal, and the work in Nepal was actually really cool. We were, going into very remote areas of Nepal, which these are places with no roads leading in or out, and we had rescued a lot of children just during and after the war, and the Civil War, and then start to realize, like, holy cow, like these kids actually have families, and they're somewhere in these mountains that we can't find unless you actually search these mountains by foot. So nobody else was doing it, so I just kind of did it, poorly. But I'm not the guy you want out there. But that was just what I kind of ended up doing, and so, kind of one thing led to another, and this word got to the Dalai Lama, and he gives out this award every year, called Heroes of Compassion, and I got it. I think I was one of a few recipients that year. But I'll tell you this about it, which is really funny. So I also read The Art of Happiness when I was living in Nepal in this little village, and it was just absolutely life changing. And I'm a Christian by faith, a very strong Christian, but how the Dalai Lama talks and thinks is just absolutely mesmerizing and so compelling to, I think, just the human spirit in general. And so when I met him, I got to go up on stage and, shake his hand and all that kind of stuff. And I got up there and I looked back at the footage and I didn't want to let go of his hand, because like when he's like within a couple of feet, he's just this incredibly peaceful, wonderful soul. It's sort of hard to describe. And he eventually sort of had to give me like a little tap, like, okay, let's move it along. And the guy's like
Move
90 years old.
along.
The poor guy, I would have held on to him for a month. So he's a wonderful human being.
Well, congratulations. And again, to the listeners, I was not prompted to ask about that. I'm really interested. I mean, you've been named one of the top trusted AI voices from Edelman masterclass on AI fluency, and your focus is primarily behavioral, which aligns so much with Franklin Covey. Our research says 80% of people say their leaders are hands off, and then the leaders say 70% of my people know what to do. 70% say they all know what to do. And you're really focused on the behavioral, not large language models, not computer vision, not machine learning. So tell me how you got to that and what kind of work you're doing with these organizations.
Yeah, no, one of the reasons that I was so excited to talk to you, Jen, and be on this podcast was exactly that. You guys have this incredible uh mandate that comes from just what you've learned. Like, this is how we should be dealing with this. And the way I fell into all this is, first of all, completely accidental. I have zero tech background, right? Like zero. Like, my kids help me with my iPhone settings. I don't know anything about that. But what I started to realize, like, very, very early on, was that you didn't have to know any tech. In fact, I started to take machine learning classes and realized, I don't actually need any of this. This is much more like texting a person than it is like understanding a software. And just to sort of like jump ahead for a second before I come back, what I'm about to tell you, just like, and you guys are sort of, the reigning champions of things that work. But we've found that what we do in terms of treating this completely like a behavioral change and zero like a tech, and when I say zero, I mean zero. Uh, why does it work? And why, for example, like, we were brought in by Google to train 30,000 Google senior leaders and managers. You think Google needs any teaching about AI? Google basically invented AI. There's literally nothing I could tell them. So why is it? It's sort of like you could work at Peloton but not be in the best shape, right? I mean, like, it has nothing to do with tech. And also, again, just to jump ahead for a second, Microsoft research, we did this research with Microsoft. They set up this experiment over 6 months with us and the Gap, where essentially I went in, completely designed by Microsoft, and taught, half of like these kind of like large group of people at the Gap in the morning in the way that, Microsoft teaches, in the way AI is usually taught. Here are some killer prompts. Here's your use cases. Just talk to it, like all the usual stuff. Here's how AI works. So I taught that with enthusiasm. And then the afternoon, I taught with enthusiasm our way of teaching, which has no use cases, no frameworks, or it has frameworks, but like no tech whatsoever. No, here's how it works. No features, nothing like that. Just here's how the brain thinks about things. And here's what you're having trouble with AI. And here's what's blocking adoption. And after 30 minutes of both kind of training, our training literally doubled the quality of output, not sentiment, the quality of output, blinded graders, everything like that. So what I'm about to tell you actually works. So here's what we found early on. We found that people were treating this like software. They were treating it as if it's something you have to learn, which is, by the way, the history of technology. You have to learn how Excel works and PowerPoint works. You have to learn how to speak a language. You have to learn calculus. Like, your brain, you can't just like skip to the end and say, okay, now I've got it. But what we found was that AI had nothing to do with that, because there's nothing to learn. People keep thinking you have to learn how to prompt. And our argument is prompting is literally talking. This is literally like texting a person that knows everything. Nothing more, nothing less. So why is it hard? That's the big question. And the reason it's hard, in a nutshell, is that the brain, the human brain, has a very hard time looking at software and understanding that this is software that behaves like a person because we've never seen it before. So we've built out a lot of frameworks around that, and I think they work.
If you're enjoying today's episode, we've got a resource that you might be interested in. The Franklin Covey Institute recently published a new insight report called AI Transformation and the Human Imperative. It digs into AI adoption and what the best leaders are doing to enable meaningful results. If you're trying to figure out how to lead your people through this time of rapid transformation, you can grab a free copy in the show notes. Now back to the show. I want to talk more about that because, as you mentioned, it doesn't make immediate sense that when you see Google, right, and that's one of your big clients, you're thinking, Google? They know all about AI. And I did something similar to you. I liked it, but understanding how computer vision works and understanding large language models and the evolution and then the breakthroughs didn't make me a better user.
Right.
And why is it so confusing to us? I keep thinking, even personally, do I not know the best use cases? Or am I behind? I used it for this, but it looks like people are using it for that. How do you deal with that uncertainty or when there is a use case? I mean, there are medical use cases, there are financial use cases, and then I kind of like glom on to the one that's going to be most helpful. Tell us a little bit more about why yours made such a difference.
Yeah, so it's maybe just easiest to sort of describe what we do. So when you think about this for a second, the brain, of course, has a hard time looking at a software and believing that it's a person in some way. Obviously, it's not a person, but it behaves like a person because that's never been the case in the history of technology. So even when we're working with companies that say, oh, we have 80% adoption or something like that, we would say, well, let's look at that 80%. Because if you look at how people are actually using AI, it just means that they've probably opened ChatGPT. They're probably only using it 3 or 4 times a week or something like that. You could not pay me to only use it 3 or 4 times a week. It's like saying people only use electricity 3 or 4 times a week, or only use the internet 3 or 4 times a week, or only talk to the colleague that sits next to them 3 or 4 times a week. It's kind of like ludicrous if you think about it. So we don't just sort of say this is a behavioral shift. We actually get people changing. That's how that work with Microsoft and Gap kind of like came to be. So what does that actually mean? It means this. Your brain, when it sees something like ChatGPT, an interesting thing happens. It actually doesn't think it's looking at a person. It thinks it's looking at a search engine. Why is that? Because your brain does a few things really well, right? It does like pattern, prediction, automation. The way automation works in your brain is that you have these neural pathways. And when you see something, your brain just immediately processes what it is, right? So if we had like a baby sitting here, you wouldn't accidentally talk to it, like it was a college professor or something, right? You don't have to think about it. Or if you're making coffee in the morning, you don't really have to focus. Remember when you're first learning to drive, you're like, my son is 17, so I remember this. You're gripping the wheel and, somebody tries to talk to you, like, don't talk to me, right? Like, and now
Yeah.
you can drive in the pouring rain, listen to a podcast, have a conversation because your brain has automated something very complicated, driving, right? Well, that's good and bad because when your brain sees ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whatever it is, your brain is literally working off visual cues and saying, I know what this is. It's a search engine. Why? Because it looks exactly like a search engine. And the problem is it kind of acts like a search engine. So what is the problem? The problem isn't that it can't do a web search. It can. The problem is your brain. What is your brain doing when it sees that? In the same way, when your brain sees a coffee mug, it doesn't think, what do I do here? No, it just instinctively grabs for the handle, lifts it up, puts it to your mouth without you thinking. When your brain sees ChatGPT, it goes into search engine mode. We call it Google Brain. It does this. It gives it a command and it gets a response and it walks away. So what have we done? We've taken this AI, which is essentially a conversational type thing, and we've turned it into a fancy search engine that sometimes hallucinates. So that's the major problem we have. So what we do in a very short amount of time is we wrench people out of that. And what we do, like a rewire, just with a couple of frameworks, and we talk to them about how to think about that differently. I can go on, but I know I'm sort of like filibustering a
Well,
little
no,
bit. Yeah.
I'm really interested in how to think about it. If you think about leaders in organizations, right? As you've worked with these and you're the leader of a team or you're the leader of a business unit or you're the leader of the whole organization. Beyond the frameworks, which are critical across the board, no matter what role you have. What kinds of things are you challenging leaders to do to narrow this gap between my people are using it the 3 to 4 times a week, which isn't really the use case, to this is going to change productivity in your organization, outcomes. You need to do it as the floor rises, you need to come up with the floor, and those that can push the ceiling need to push the ceiling. What are you challenging leaders to do?
Yeah, so this is a good question because typically with anything, you sort of talk to leaders in a different way than you talk to everybody else because they have a different mandate, a different responsibility. The interesting thing is, we have worked with leadership teams across every industry you can probably imagine, right? And the thing is, you still have to start them off with this rewire. So we've worked with literally Fortune 1, like we've done Walmart's leadership team, right? So what does that mean? It means we still have to start with this notion of you're still looking at AI the wrong way. Unless you look at it for what it is, you're never going to be able to understand how the entire organization changes. Because right now, in a vacuum, what do we do? Like we say to leadership, okay, here's AI, it's this powerful thing. And what does leadership do? They say, okay, well, where in the organization should we focus it? Okay, what's everybody's use cases, et cetera? We don't teach prompt engineering. We don't teach use cases. We don't teach features, right? Why is that? Because you wouldn't teach features and use cases and things like and prompting if you had a new colleague, right? Like when you have a new colleague, brilliant new colleague, they come and sit down. What do? You don't think, all right, let me think about what are some use cases for this person, right? You don't think like, excuse me.
I mean,
Well,
sometimes.
yeah, sometimes. But here's what you definitely don't do. You definitely don't like give them a command and say, hey, go off and do this project and then let them sort of like go. No, you give them context. You sort of explain it well. That's prompting, right? And then when they come back, what do? You don't instantly say like, great, that's it. I'm going to, no, you sort of see like, well, was it this good or was this bad? You go back and forth with them. And then when you're done with that, you don't say, okay, you're done for the day, go home. No, you keep going, you keep going. AI is like another company that you've merged with, except this company is filled with people who don't like to come off camera. They're only virtual. They only like to text, right? Like that's what this is. It is a new kind of colleague, and I mean that literally. But back to your question about leadership, what we find is that when we work with leadership teams, and by the way, we have like a whole enterprise model. We work with Fortune 100s to train the entire organization, tens of thousands of people. But the important part is with leadership, we have to start with them. Because first of all, they have to understand what AI totally is. Because if they don't, they'll never be able to set new benchmarks. They'll never be able to be thinking about recruiting and hiring and everything else. They won't be able to think about strategy. But then to your other point, I just want to mention this one last thing, because this is what we did with Walmart. We think about this as a productivity tool. But what Walmart and others were seeing was like, okay, we're seeing productivity go up, but it's a sort of a linear thing. Where is what we like to call it AI mindset, the million little hockey sticks? Where do you reinvent processes? And that got us thinking like, right, this isn't just about productivity. This is about reinvention. So how do we actually do that?
Totally agreed. How long do you think it is till, as a manager, that you're managing? I love how closely you're tying it to a new person on your team. How long is it until, and I'm sure some are right now, you're managing agents and you're managing people? No,
Yep.
you're managing your AI agents. They're doing these things, and here's how you manage people. Do you see that?
I do, but I'll tell you this. I think it's going to take longer than people think. I think that people get really confused between, and you guys know this better than anybody else, between what the technology can do and what people can do with it. Right? So I mean,
Yes.
like AI
Yes.
is way advanced. And I think what Franklin Covey does really well, especially, is think like, yeah, I get it. You have this new technology. That's not the problem. The problem is, how are people thinking? Are people understanding what this is? That's the fundamental problem with AI. People think that it's a technology. I get asked all the time, what's the best AI? I'm like, who cares? That's like asking, what's the best treadmill? It's like you can buy the treadmill with all the features. You can be incredibly motivated. You can sort of like, you can know how to use the treadmill, etc. The problem isn't that. The problem is your brain. The problem is your brain prioritizes quick rewards and conserving energy, right? So it's like saying like, hey, if we put a Whole Foods in every neighborhood and we put a treadmill in every house in America, How soon do we think it'll be before everybody's in great shape? I think we know the answer to that question, right? Because it's
Yes,
not about
yes.
accessibility. It's not about knowledge. We already know, or I should say, I already know that a salad is better than a cheeseburger. I already know it's incredibly simple. It requires nothing. I already know. And yet my personal trainer, whoever would be like, Connor, just pick up the salad. I'm like, I hear you, brother, but I'm reaching for this cheeseburger. He's like, but you wanted to get in shape. I know, but you know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah, yeah.
the problem. So when we say like, how long will it be? I think it'll be a while. Is the technology is already here, but how we work is what needs changing.
How we work. It is so unique to all of us. And of course, that brings some fear
Yeah.
and some anxiety, in addition to the rewiring. As part of your conversations, a very human thing is to be fearful.
Yes.
How do you address that when that comes up in your audiences, in the groups that you're working with?
You know, I like this question because I'm not even sure it comes up, right? It's one of these things where people stay silent. When they're fearful, they're not exactly going to raise their hand in front of their boss and everybody else and saying, like, hey, I'm
And
afraid
say,
of this.
I'm scared.
Exactly. Right. You find this too, right? I mean, like, that's not
Hmm.
how people do it. They merely go back to their desk and then they're like, boy, no, thank you on AI. It hallucinates, it blah, blah, blah. Right. Like, so when we work with big organizations, again, at scale, and we have like a course and a platform, by the way, that works for the same thing, works for beginners and power users, because again, it's not about where you are on this learning spectrum. People can be scared or people can be power users, and you have to use the same methodology. So when we're rolling out, 30,000 of these, the same course, it's interesting because you have to tackle the fear thing the same as you tackle somebody who's a power user. And here's why. First of all, you have to meet them where they are. By the way, to
Hmm.
your point, this is a leadership problem, people. It is a leadership problem. You can never say to people, don't be scared of this, right? Like it's the what you have to do is
That's as useful as saying, be calm. Has that ever calmed anybody?
it's great. Yeah, just calm down. It's like if there's a bear
Calm
coming
down.
at you. It's like lie down. It's like, man, you lie down. I'm running up this tree. Right. So like that you
Yes.
can't, or it's like saying eat less and exercise, everybody. Like we know that part. So what happens with the fear thing? I think when we work with leadership teams in particular, after we do this whole rewire, and by the way, the rewire works for beginners. It should be straightforward, but it works for power users because they're telling everybody else, just talk to it. Just find your use cases. They don't understand what's hard for other people. So we're giving them that knowledge and that framework. But with leadership, the first thing, so it's like there's like four mandates of leadership. It's like messaging, move from encouragement to expectation of use, how you redeploy time from productivity to innovation, and then how you redo recruiting. But to your point, the first one is messaging. You have to, and this is where we get all Brene Brown on everybody here, right? Leadership,
Who I love.
right? Me too, me too. But I'll tell you who doesn't
Yes.
love it. The hedge funds that we work with, and you
Oh,
know what I mean.
sure.
Like, and we work with some of the biggest PE firms in the world, literally the two biggest.
PE.
And those aren't Brene Brown shops. So here's what works though. When leadership does not start, and we say, leaders, please never start with, guys, we got to use AI. Guys, it's going to make us more productive. Hey, everybody, like look what I built. Never, never, never. You have to start like this. Hey, AI terrifies me too. It also terrifies me because my kids, I don't know if they're going to have jobs. It also terrifies me because I don't know how to use it. And also, I didn't know what to use it for. And then you know what happened? My daughter spilled makeup on the counter and she's only 12 and I want to be a good dad. But I also kind of have to say like, hey, we got to clean this up. And so then I turned to ChatGPT. I'm like, I'm lost. And ChatGPT gave me this amazing answer. Do you see what I mean? Like it's that
Yes.
vulnerability that leaders have to lead with.
The empathy, the
Yes.
clarity, the curiosity. We have, of course, a smaller offering about leading through AI, and there's so much alignment. I've been loving listen to you. One of my last questions is I'd love to know, I know it's not your emphasis. But what is one of your favorite use cases out there? I don't want to lock us all in. I want us to have curiosity moving forward and remember what you said about clarity, expectations, empathy. And what's one of your favorite use cases?
Yeah, I really do like this question, actually. I'll say this, that for me, I'll use it literally for kind of everything. I'll say that one of my favorite use cases is technology. When technology isn't working, I just take a photo of my laptop and say, like, what does this mean that I need the plugin for whatever? Like, that's a spectacular use case. But I will also say, if people are having trouble just getting started, I had Mustafa Suleiman on our podcast a long time ago, who heads up AI for Microsoft, And I was asking him how people get started. What's his use case? And he said, you know what the best thing to do is ask it a personal question. And I love that because you'll see how smartly, intuitively, empathetically it responds. And what does that do? It promotes a conversation. And what does that do? It starts to promote, giant air quotes here, trust in the same way you would with a person. And then you're like, well, listen, heck, if I can talk to this about this, maybe I can also talk to it about my work issues. So if you're stuck, I know that sounds weird. It's safe. You can upload personal questions. Just try that. It sounds counterintuitive to a kind of a productivity use case, but it's how we build trust. And that's how we really start relationships with colleagues that end up being the most trusted people in our lives.
I love it, and it rings true. One of my favorite use cases recently was how to redo backyard
Ooh,
chairs,
love.
metal, and should I go professional or could I do it myself? And, then you start to be like, oh, this is really smart.
Hmm.
Excellent. Conor, is there anything I should have asked you that you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about?
Oh my gosh, we could go all day. I'll just say
We could go
this.
all day.
Uh,
Both of us.
no,
Chatty, chatty.
I love your questions. Let me just say this to folks who are either struggling with it or can't figure out why everybody in their organization isn't using it. The problem isn't that they don't understand tech. The problem is their human brain is just struggling to understand that. And we like to sort of like share a lot of frameworks around here are things that wrench you out of that. Not just tell them that it's a problem, but actually wrench you out of that, including saying things like if you're having problems identifying your use cases, it's because your brain has a problem with a blank box, just saying like, hey, try anything. Or if you can't figure out like what to do, it's like electricity, like saying like, hey, how do you would use electricity? Answer has that question has a million answers to it. You have to start with what people are doing. And I say to people all the time, forget AI. Think about how you work and then bring AI in as a teammate. And there's frameworks for that. But I really have confidence in AI. I know it can lie. I know it can go off the rails, but people can too. But I'm excited to see where this all goes.
I love that. People can too. Right. Well, Conor, thank you for sharing time with me, with our listeners, for your insight into AI fluency and the behavioral and leadership imperatives behind that. Thank you for joining On Leadership. And listeners, we'll see you again next time.